So, this you need to know. Every part that's on here, you need to know. Where blood flows and where it flows in steps, you need to know. So step 1, superior vena cava. Huge vein that brings blood from my head and arms and drains back into my heart. Inferior vena cava. Huge vein that brings blood from the bottom part of my body. Both of these empty into the right atrium. So here again, right is backwards on your diagrams. My right side, this is the right side, but when you look at it, it appears left. So right atrium collects blood from your body. This is deoxygenated, it's used blood. Here is my tricuspid valve. So it drops through the bicuspid valve, the tricuspid valve, and falls into the right ventricle. At that same time, on the other side, I have my pulmonary veins from my left lungs and my right lungs. That blood is coming back and falls into the left atrium. From the left atrium, it drops through the mitral valve or bicuspid, ends up in the left ventricle. So blood falls into the atrium and goes through to the ventricles. So when we do heart rates, that lub-dub, bump, 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 that sound of your heart rate, it is blood entering here and here. So basically, the top of your heart kind of squeezes, the bottom of your heart squeezes. It doesn't squeeze from right to left, it squeezes top to bottom. So, once the blood has come into the right ventricle, it's going to go through pulmonary valve, which tells me it's going to the lungs, pulmonary valve, into your pulmonary trunk, and pulmonary artery because it's going away. This is your only blue, this is the blue artery. Takes blood to my lungs. Once the blood is in my lungs, it is going to pick up oxygen that my cells need. So picks up oxygen in the lungs, comes back through these red, that's why these veins are red. So oxygenated blood comes to the left atrium, drops through into the left ventricle. This is good, full of oxygen blood. Comes up, does not show the aortic valve is underneath here, and it's going to lead to my aorta. And this aorta is going to send blood up to my head and arms and everywhere, and it's going to send it down to the rest of my body. So, steps of blood flow. Comes in through the vena cavas, into my right atrium, drops through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, out the pulmonary valve, through the pulmonary trunk and arteries to my lungs. In my lungs, they pick up oxygen. So now my blood has oxygen that's needed. Comes back through my pulmonary veins into my left atrium, drops through the bicuspid valve, left ventricle, out the aortic valve, into the aorta, and throughout my body. So that order in these places, you specifically need to know all of that. Table tells you a little bit about each valve. Went through that already. Picture of what the valves are like. They are very, very thin, and these cusps are what you can kind of see, a cusp here and a cusp here. This would, you can see how they're basically very, very thin flaps. And underneath those flaps are going to be basically stringy cords that prevent them from going backwards. So the outside, the skeleton of the heart, there's dense connective tissue that surrounds the pulmonary trunk, aorta, It basically gives places for heart valves and fibers to attach, and the tough rings prevent dilating of tissue. Skeleton, I won't ask as much about. Blood flow, here again, you can read through it. This is what I just told you looking at that diagram. So blood low in oxygen comes to the right atrium through the vena cavas and the coronary sinus, which drains the heart. Right atrium contracts, blood goes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it contracts, the tricuspid valve closes, the pulmonary opens, goes into the pulmonary trunk and arteries. Those arteries take blood to the lungs, where they get rid of carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. Once the oxygen is picked up, it goes to the left side of the heart, starts in the left atrium contracts, goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle contracts, sends blood out the aorta, and then throughout your entire body. And here's kind of a diagram, pretty much the same as the front one, it's just highlighting your heart part. So this section of notes, very, very important.